Before we get into today's episode, folks, let me make something perfectly clear when it comes to the contents of this video. I do not support Activision Blizzard. They are, as a whole, a company that has taken advantage of their players for years, ignored them, and thought they were simply unbeatable because of the explosive popularity of their main IP. The whole recent lawsuits further goes to expose just how bad they've really become. But despite all of this, I do have good memories of my time in WoW, and I wanted to talk about that time that I remembered most. The time where I had the most fun and enjoyed the World of Warcraft at its best. The time of the Mists of Pandaria. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I am your ever-friendly Pokeprof, and welcome back to Fascinating Fiction. So yeah, I did play World of Warcraft back in the day. In fact, the first time I ever started playing was back in high school, when I ended up going over to a cousin's house and playing the game after I got introduced to it through their boyfriend. This was around the time of the Burning Crusade expansion being in full swing, and it wasn't like anything else I had played, and I continued to go over there for like a month or two to play on his account until I was able to get together the money to start also playing. My original main when I first got started was a female night elf hunter by the name of Uranus, being a play on Samus Aran's name, and I still remember ending up getting lost while I looked through Horde territory to tame something that was kind of rare to see a night elf have as a pet. A purple raptor that I eventually named Riptor that I tamed within the Wailing Caverns dungeon. I remember going through the game and its expansions, collecting all these different pets when I could, and I even did my best to collect some of the rare ones, such as the Spectral Hydra and the Plague Worm pets that were in the game solely as bugs. I didn't stay as an elf or a hunter forever though. When Wrath of the Lich King came around, I was among the many players that made the transition over to Death Knight, though that was more because of what happened to the hunter class as a whole than any real choice of mine. It was through being a Death Knight though that I found my love of tanking that I honestly didn't know I had before, and while I had many alts before and after that point, my Draenei Death Knight Delphira was the one I played on the most, the one I went through the content with first, and usually the one I went to make sure I got stuff on. Fast forward to Mists of Pandaria, and we run into an interesting situation here. For a lot of people, this expansion is one that they simply made fun of, about how the likes of Kung Fu Panda was going to be coming in and ruining the game. At the time, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. All I knew about the Pandaren was that they were a thing that was kind of a joke that was put into Warcraft 3, a game that I honestly had never played, even to this day. I went into the expansion with a fairly open mind, especially with the opening cinematic showing off some really cool and interesting things when it came to the panda race. And that's when World of Warcraft did something here that they haven't really done in the game before, or since for that matter. They told a story through both the zones and reputations, and how to focus on the characters in a way that not even Legion, for all of its bells and whistles and interesting events, could ever hope to really match. What exactly do I mean here? Well, let me talk about 3 separate regions to show off exactly what I mean. Let's start off with my favorite of all the regions, Valley of the Four Winds. It's at the start of the zone that we meet up with Chen Stormstout, the Pandaren that's pretty much what people think when they talk about the race, seeing as he's the character they used in Warcraft 3. Knowing nothing about him other than that name and that legacy, I'm wondering what we were going to get when we started my questlines for him. As it turns out, Chen embodies the very core aspect that you see with the Pandaren as a whole. Slowing down, savoring life, and enjoying what is there even while progressing further. While we do eventually find out part of the reason for this lifestyle is because of the crazy fantasy stuff of their world, namely evil spirits that come from darker emotions known as the Sha, it was something that the expansion took to heart even within its quests. At this point in my WoW career, I had pretty much done everything. I killed 10 bears and brought their asses back to an NPC. I'd gone through and fought everything from Little Fishman and Dog-Faced Gnolls, all the way up to taking down the Lich King and Deathwing to end some of the biggest threats that the video game world had ever seen. And now, with this panda, I was being told to relax, to sit back, to slow down and enjoy life, with the quests that pretty much did the same. And you know what? I did. I went on this little journey with Chen and his niece Lily. Got to see them go through the local vendors and merchants of the valley. I got to see how eager Lily was, thirsty for adventure, and how she was being tempered by her uncle into not taking what she had for granted. I got to learn more about the Stormstout history, about the possible family that Chen desperately wanted to know and learn more about. And then the pain of finding out that said family couldn't care less about him. But my favorite part of it all was perhaps the adventures of Mudmug and, well, the eventual connection that both we as the players and Chen himself has with him. The questline is seriously about us hanging out with a panda that uses muddy water to make his ale, and I actually grew really attached to this character that Chen would eventually name Beer Brother, someone who decided to stick around and help us out despite it nothing really that he needed to do. The voice acting in this is also probably what helped it become so important to me, since for the first time in the entirety of WoW, we had characters actually speaking to us, the player, instead of just shoving a huge wall of text at us.
We are the outsiders here, Lily. We probably look even weirder to him.
Huh. Only because we're traveling with this outsider. Oh, sorry, but you do kind of stand out.
We got to see little interactions of having these different characters journeying alongside of us, such as Mudmug telling us that he was strong enough to lug a bunch of barrels around the valley while we did other quests, or Lily sarcastically going on about how her favorite part of collecting muddy water for one quest was when it splashed her in the eyes. This wasn't something that we really had before in WoW, and while they did do this in some of the later expansions, it was never to the same extent either. And while the Valley of the Four Winds is one of the best examples of this in Pandaria, it's not the only instance I remember it being so good. The Jade Forest, for example, has this storyline about a trio of Alliance members who are trying to find Anduin, and we get to know all three of them and their quirks as we advance throughout the region. I got attached to Amber, Taylor, and Sully, and was always curious to see what happened to them next. Imagine my disappointment when two of these characters are killed, off screen no less, and in the case of Amber, part of a storyline plot that I would never be a part of unless I wanted to go and level up a rogue. But it is, perhaps, the final region that I'm wanting to talk about that is something that I think I will remember the most from my days of World of Warcraft. And not just for the story itself, which I'll be 100% honest, I don't remember it entirely, but for the faction within it. In the Dread Wastes, we end up allying ourselves with a faction that, up to this point in Pandaria, we have been treating as enemies that we have got to kill, regardless if we're the Alliance or the Horde. This faction, the Klaxi, are an insect race with a long history that I won't really go into right now, but what you need to know is this. Part of the reason for them being villains within Pandaria is actually mostly because of their life cycle. They send off their young against the Pandaren so that the weak will die and fail, while the strong survive and return to further the rest of the race. This unfortunately has been thrown out of whack as their queen has fallen to one of the Shah, forcing a never-ending assault on the rest of Pandaria. Since this is at risk of simply ending their race as a whole, since there's absolutely no rhyme or reason to her attacks, the Klaxi reluctantly agree to the player helping them out to overthrow their queen. What makes this particular faction so much better compared to the rest of them is simply the fact of how they play and the story that involves them. You see, for the most part, the factions in WoW were pretty boring. Go fight some monster, go collect something, do a daily task to slowly build your rep up, and then maybe they'll like you a bit more. And while you had to do this with the Klaxi, there was something special with them. With these bugmen, we end up being christened as the Wakener, going around and breaking out special members of the Klaxi race known as the Paragons that had been locked away in Amber, there to be awakened in times of great need. As you wake them up and help out the faction, the Paragons will not only have special quests for you often relating to their specialties, such as one member being focused on poisons, but they actually give you special buffs relating to those abilities as well. This was only a slight change in your actual gameplay when it came to this faction, but that's something that none of the other factions did at this point. But you want to know what the best part was? Once you had defeated their queen, who was a raid boss no less, and ended up getting them to the highest level that you could for a faction, one of the leaders of the Klaxi will take you down into the very depths of their base, telling you about their history and how it relates to the Shah. But one thing is made perfectly clear. The Klaxi worshipped the old gods, and should they ever return, the Klaxi will be at their side, with the Mantis telling the player that they should do the same. It was downright chilling to be told that no matter what I did, these creatures that I had been helping out and aiding for the last few weeks would then turn around and still become my enemy should the gods that they worship return. And this later became true as they became a fight within the Siege of Orgrimmar, where we had to fight and kill all the Paragons. It was a really somber fight for me because this was among the first times that I had ever had a raid boss that I, personally, had developed a relationship with. I had helped these guys, worked with them, fought alongside with them, and now I was having to take them down. This was something that, while by no means the best storytelling that WoW ever did, was still something that stuck to me even till this day. And you want to know what I find funny? It's these elements that I've come to love so much in Final Fantasy XIV, where we get to know these characters, work with them, fight alongside and against them in a story told throughout the game. What felt like something that they just decided to go a little extra for in one expansion of World of Warcraft has ended up being my entire experience in Final Fantasy XIV. I will always remember my times with World of Warcraft. It was where I made a number of friends, and the experiences that I've had will be something that I will cherish forever. But the game has fallen since then, no longer offering anything as to what I would enjoy, even if I could stomach how the company treats both players and employees. It's just a time to remember, and I think that's enough for me.